And my name is Ed Rendell, and I am the co-chairman of Building America's Future with Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York and Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger of California. BAF was founded in 2008, dedicated to trying to convince this country to revitalize our infrastructure to make us more economically competitive, to increase our public safety, to improve our quality of life, and to create desperately needed, good-paying jobs for the country itself. Funding has been hard to come by, although many state legislatures around the country have stepped up and have made passed significant legislation increasing infrastructure spending, particularly transportation infrastructure. But here in Washington, a lot of the things that we've said have fallen on deaf ears. Virtually every congressman and every senator says, you're right, we need to do something about our infrastructure, but we can't afford to pay for it. Building America's Future believes we can't not afford to pay for it. We are losing ground tremendously in economic competition with the other countries of the world. Other countries are investing significant dollars in their infrastructure, revitalizing it, modernizing it, while we stand and see it crumble. Building America's Future issued a report 2 years ago called Falling Behind, meaning falling behind competitively, falling apart, which our infrastructure literally is doing. And this is nowhere more relevant than with the nation's bridges. The United States of America has 607,000 bridges all across the country, and 10% of them, a little more than 10%, 66,000, are structurally deficient. That means they have a significant defect that has to be watched closely and could lead to eventual problems if not remedied. We need to take action repairing America's bridges. It works. When there are dollars available, we put people to work and we fix up bridges, we make them safer, we make them more able to help commerce and help transportation. It's an important aspect of what we need to do. The Congressman Rahall, has introduced something called the Safe Bridges Act. And I am here representing Building America's Future to do as other transportation groups have done, and that's strongly, and I want to emphasize the word strongly endorse the passage of the Safe Bridges Act. The Safe Bridges Act intends to spend $5.5 billion over the next 2 years repairing the nation's bridges. It is of enormous importance that we get this done. The formula, and the congressman can go into it specifically, but the formula takes into account not only the amount of bridges that a state has, but the condition of those bridges. Pennsylvania, which has got a third of the population of California, has 1,000 less bridges. We have 22,000 bridges. California has 23,000. But our bridges, because they're older, obviously, there are more of them that are structurally deficient. So we get a significant amount of money. Pennsylvania would get, over the course of 2 years, about $500 million. Now, to give you an idea of the impact of that, when I was governor, I put my money where my mouth is, and we passed, in addition to our normal transportation funding, the match that we had to federal dollars, we passed a special bond issue for bridge repair, because Pennsylvania led the nation in structurally deficient bridges. We had over 6,700 structurally deficient bridges. We did a $400 million bond issue. Some of that money is still being spent today, but we have reduced our number of structurally deficient bridges by 1,200. We are now down at 5,500. There's still some of that money that's being spent. We also had the aid of dollars from the President's stimulus program that helped us with bridge repair as well. Pennsylvania today is working on more bridges than any other state in the union but one. That type of spending makes a difference. Pennsylvania is more economically competitive. Our citizens are safer because of that $400 million. This $500 million that can be dedicated to Pennsylvania will, in my judgment, be able to do as many as 1,400 or 1,500 structurally deficient bridges. That's about a third of all the structurally deficient bridges in Pennsylvania. The impact is significant in every state of the union, and I think it's interesting to note that this week is the 80th anniversary of the Public Works Administration legislation that created the Public Works Administration under President Roosevelt. Public Works Administration spent $6 billion over the next 6 years repairing the nation's infrastructure. It electrified rural America. It built school buildings. It built dams. It built bridges and roads. It rebuilt bridges and roads. It did many water and sewer systems. It did great things for America and created millions of good-paying jobs back then when they were especially needed. The interesting thing about this legislation is today that $6 billion, since the CPI has risen by 1,666%, that $6 billion would be $105 billion. And because construction costs have increased by 4,700%, we would need today, to the equivalent of that $6 billion, we would need over $300 billion to do that today. The Public Works Administration worked. It built some of the most amazing things in America, the Triborough Bridge, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Grand Coulee Dam. We need to do it again. And this step that Congressman Rahall is taking, this step is very, very important. A lot of the bridges that we're going to rebuild aren't very glamorous. But when that structurally deficient bridge turns into a tragedy, everyone listens. But it's too late at that point. This is an effort to prevent the Skagit Bridge from happening, to prevent the bridge in Minneapolis from happening, to repair our bridges, make us more economically competitive. And Congressman, I hope we have a bipartisan response. I know right now we have all Democrats on the bill, but many of my Republican friends, when I testified at the first hearing that you and Congressman Schuster had as the new team, there were Republicans who stood up and said, I'm a Tea Party member, but I know we need to invest in the nation's infrastructure. So I'm calling on virtually everyone, Democrats, Republicans from every state in the union. Every state benefits by this bill. It ought to be passed, and it ought to be done so in a bipartisan fashion. $5.5 billion is a small price to pay for taking a giant step to fix our nation's bridges. Congressman.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you very much, Governor Rendell. I appreciate very much your leadership and your steadfast commitment to America's infrastructure. It's wonderful to have your support for the Safe Bridges Act, and I look forward to working with you as we continue to push this legislation forward. Near the end of your remarks, you referenced the testimony that you gave before our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee earlier this year. You're right, you had a lot of bipartisan support at that time. You testified along with the AFL-CIO and along with the United States Chamber of Commerce. It got us off to a good start. Recently, as you have referenced in your remarks, we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the PWA, the Public Works Administration. Now, some of you may look at my hair and color my hair and think I was around at that time, but I was not. But Governor Rendell has listed the many projects that have benefited under the PWA, and certainly the initiative and the commitment of the Public Works Administration to our infrastructure is just as much needed today as it was 80 years ago. We have infrastructure deficiencies. We have an infrastructure deficit in this country that has been neglected for far too long. Not far from here, you probably can't see it, but Union Station is standing behind us, just beyond the Capitol Dome, and it's one of the busiest rail stations in the country, as we all know. That was one of the first acts, one of the first structures that the PWA provided funds for, to completely electrify the Pennsylvania rail line from Union Station to New York City, along much what we refer to today as the Northeast Corridor. And you know what? Besides the physical infrastructure of those projects, it put people to work. For example, some 20,000 carpenters, electricians, rail workers, engineers, construction engineers, and many more were put to work boosting our rail infrastructure while performing a public service for the good of our nation. And just as those electrified trains started pulling into Penn Station in New York, thousands of construction workers were building one of the largest bridges in the world, a stone's throw away, with funding from PWA. And the governor has referenced that bridge, the Triborough Bridge, that opened to traffic some 77 years ago today. And many other projects. These are just two examples of the infrastructure projects funded by PWA and similar federal programs. Put people to work, unleashed our new economic opportunity across our land, and lifted us from the depths of a Great Depression. Now, thankfully, today we're not grappling with the unemployment figures that we were in those days or the unemployment levels of the early 1930s, but by golly, people still need work today. We know that to be a fact of life. And our infrastructure needs modernization. We are literally being left in the dust when you compare us with with our foreign competition and the percentage of our gross domestic product that we spend on infrastructure versus what our foreign competition spends. Earlier this spring, we were given a startling wake-up call about the state of our infrastructure with the collapse of the I-5 bridge in Washington State, and it should not take another tragedy. It should not take another tragedy to spur our country to action and to spur this Congress more specifically to action. We all know the statistics. We've all heard them before. The warnings are out there. It's clearly up to us to act. The Safe Bridges Act that we're here today to support would provide funding to start reducing the staggering bridge backlog that we're now facing. It gives targeted funding for states to rehabilitate and replace their structurally deficient, functionally obsolete, and fracture-critical bridges. Of course, we know this legislation is not the answer alone. Much more needs to be done, but it is time that we get a good start. So I will continue to push for consideration of this bill before the full House of Representatives, before our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, because it does provide the means for a safe and reliable transportation, and that, in my opinion, should be one of the core functions of our government. And indeed, going back to that initial testimony of Governor Rendell and Mr. Donahue and Mr. O'Sullivan earlier this year, that was something they all agreed upon. There is a federal role. There is a federal role in providing for infrastructure improvements and the safe travel of our American people. So we cannot afford to wait anymore. We cannot afford to wait for the next bridge collapse. We cannot wait to just nibble along like we did in MAP 21, but it's time that we step up to the plate in the Congress, that we have the courage to act, and that we pass a robust and a fully funded, not only transportation bill, but before that, even more urgent, is that we pass the Safe Bridges Act so that we can address these deficient bridges, these functionally obsolete bridges, of which when you combine both structurally deficient and functionally obsolete bridges together, 1/3 of the bridges in my home state in West Virginia fall in either one of these categories. And the governor's referenced a chart, and we have those charts available that show you the number of deficient bridges state by state, and the or the number of bridges, the percentage rather, of all their bridges that are either functionally obsolete or structurally deficient. So with that, let me again thank Governor Rendell and his coalition, because that's what it's going to take, is a coalition, building coalitions to build support for the Safe Bridges Act and thereby protect our American people, provide jobs for our people as well, and continue the growth of our economy out of this recession. So with that, I think the governor and I both would respond to questions. Well, we're providing, as I said, targeted funding, and it's a $12.1 billion total package that would address deficient highway bridges that are identified in the Department of Transportation's most recent conditions and performance report. Now, the bill provides $2.7 billion in both fiscal year 2013 and fiscal year 2014. The amount is a 50% increase in bridge funding from fiscal year 2012 during the remaining years of MAP 21. This will be for states to rehabilitate and to reconstruct their structurally deficient, functionally obsolete, and fracture-critical bridges. It distributes the funds to the states on a need-based formula based on each state's share of deficient bridges. These funds are in addition, I might add, in addition to the regular federal aid to highway program funds that a state receives, and they're not transferable to any other program or activity. And this is where MAP 21 might have been slightly deficient in that it removed the targeting of these funds to bridges alone. And that's what we want to restore, is the high priority need to address these bridges, and it would come out of general revenues.
I just want to add one thing about cost. We always talk about what's the cost of infrastructure improvements, but we don't talk about what's the cost of doing nothing. And there are so many cars and trucks in this country that because of inferior roads or inferior bridges, bridges with gaping holes in them, bridges with structurally deficient problems, that get broken down, that have things happen to their vehicles that need repair. Those repair costs are enormous. A lot of that could be avoided if we had first-class bridges and first-class roads. People sit in traffic forever and they idle their cars, chewing up gasoline. They'll waste hundreds of dollars a year by idling in traffic on gasoline costs. Loss of productivity. The UPS will tell you for every 5 minutes that they're delayed in traffic, there's a cost to that, and that cost gets passed on to American businesses who are often competing, as the congressman said, with foreign competitors. So we've got to compute the cost of doing nothing when we talk about busted tires and axles. We've got to compute that when we talk about cost. And additionally, this $2.7 billion may not be a lot of money for Washington, but according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, that will produce $1 billion of infrastructure spending, produces 25,000 well-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. So this bill would each year of the 2 years create 70,000 new good-paying jobs that pay $40, $50, $60, $70,000 a year. It's exactly what the country needs. No sectors of the economy have been hurt more than manufacturing and construction. And this bill provides a remedy for both of those.
And while we dilly-dally around with the overall elephant in the room on our transportation, which is financing, this bridge issue is a more direct emergency issue. It's an emergency out there, and that's why we can't dilly-dally anymore about how we pay for or who we rob to pay Peter or pay Paul and all that. We have to use general revenue funds immediately, address the issue immediately, and then we have to get to the long-term robust transportation bill, which I referenced as well in my remarks, and address not only all the options as I believe are needed to finance transportation, but long-term steady stream of financing that we need for our infrastructure as well. As we move forward, yes. I have discussed with Chairman Schuster. It's basically Democrats now, except for two, all Democrats on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. If it were allowed to move forward in the committee, I feel confident we could gather support from the other side as well. But we have to get it moving forward, and we have to work on those co-sponsors, and that's the immediate issue. Well, I've gotten no commitments from the chairman, but we're continuing to work on it. And, events of this nature, as the public continues to express their concern and their fears to their elected representatives, then I would expect the momentum to build for it. And that's what we have to keep pushing. If it takes us that long to address the bridge issue, that will be our effort, yes.
But the problem with waiting is, of course, the risk to public safety. And secondly, the cost goes up. Ronald Reagan said, why wouldn't we fix our bridges and roads now? Because if we delay 5 years, the cost of fixing them is going to be exponentially higher. Ronald Reagan said that. He was for spending money on infrastructure because he understood the need, and he understood that you do it now, you minimize the overall cost. We've waited far too long to do something about our infrastructure. We are the only developed nation in the world that hasn't had in the last 15 years an infrastructure revitalization program, a big 5-year, 10-year plan to revitalize our infrastructure. That has to be remedied. That's it. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sir?
Thank you.
Let's see.
Thank
Let me
you, Governor.
know if there's people I can call.
Okay, appreciate it.
All right, we'll get